according to the Vedic calendar, the way it works out is that about every 3 years, we have to add an extra month to balance things out. And so during this month, it was generally considered like the bad month, like, you know, the really bad month, because you couldn't do any auspicious karma kind of activities. It wasn't good for that type of thing. So people, when this month came about, people just hated on it. And generally in Western culture, we're used during this hunting trip. The servants had the job to watch for animals and attacks bites the finger off. But the servant was able to fight the tiger off, but not before the king lost his finger. So they go back to the palace, and the king is very upset with the servants. Like, lock him away in the jail. He failed to protect me. You're no longer my servant. Put you in the dungeon. So the next day, this king goes out hunting again, and he takes another guy with him. And while he's hunting, he comes across a group of Kali worshippers in the forest. And they see this king, and they think, okay, we're going to do a sacrifice, and we're going to sacrifice the king. So they kidnap the king, and they start inspecting him. But then they realize his finger's missing. And so they said, okay, we can't sacrifice him, let him go. And he goes back to the palace. And then he goes and he gets the servant, and he says, thank you for not saving me, because for that one incident, the Kali worshippers didn't get me and sacrifice me. How did this work out good for you? I just stripped you of your service, and I put you in the dungeon. And the servant said, well, if you had taken me with you, they would have taken me instead of you, because I'm in perfect condition. So life is like that, but oftentimes we don't realize it in the moment, right? So in this last verse of the Gita, Sanjaya, he's telling Dhritarashtra, wherever there is Krishna, wherever there is Arjuna, there will certainly be opulence, victory, and morality. That is my opinion. And Dhritarashtra at this time, he had been hoping that somehow his sons would escape from this battle, and that, they wouldn't all be killed, and that his side wouldn't lose. And on paper, I don't know if you guys have read the Mahabharata. I've read a few versions. But on paper, the Pandavas should have lost this battle, because they had everything stacked against them. And think about it. When they were born, Pandu had gone to the forest. He had given up his kingdom because he had gotten cursed. And then, they lost their father. And then they had to return to Hastinapur under the shelter of Dhritarashtra, who had full control of the kingdom at this time. And Dhritarashtra's sons are totally envious of them. And literally the beginning of the Mahabharata is just various activities that Duryodhana and his brothers do to try to get rid of the Pandavas. It's like really, it's pastime after pastime after pastime. And they're not successful, because the Pandavas always took shelter of Krishna. And then finally they grow up a little bit, and they want a portion of the kingdom. So finally Dhritarashtra gives them a portion of the kingdom, but it's the worst portion ever. It's like barren, desert, nothing grows there, can't do anything there. It's like, not like Tucson desert. This is like awful, awful desert. Tucson desert's nice desert. And so they accept this piece of land, which is like the worst piece of land. And Duryodhana thinks, okay, I have one out, because now I got, the best piece of land where everything is very prosperous and grows. But even though the Pandavas had nothing but that horrible piece of land, they had Krishna. And because they had Krishna, does anyone know what happened? This barren piece of land then became more opulent than what the Kauravas had. And when it became more opulent, and the Pandavas had built their palace and everything, then Duryodhana sees it, then he gets upset that their piece is better than his piece. And then later we see that he arranges the whole gambling match to try to cheat the Pandavas out of their kingdom. And he's successful in it. And then he sends the Pandavas to the forest for 12 years. And then they had to stay 1 year incognito. So these Pandavas are going through calamity after calamity after calamity, but yet they're taking shelter of Krishna the whole entire time. And even when they're in the forest, Duryodhana does further stuff to try to get rid of them. And at one point he sends Durvasa Muni out to, curse the Pandavas. Well, he's hoping that he will. So he tells Durvasa Muni, you should go see the Pandavas. And he sends Durvasa Muni purposely at the time when the Pandavas had just finished eating. So Draupadi had this pot when she was in the forest that it would never run out of prasadam until she took prasadam. And so Durvasa Muni shows up with 10,000 disciples. But the problem is that Draupadi had already taken prasadam. And Durvasa Muni, if you read 9th Canto of Bhagavatam, he gets angry pretty easily. And he's not someone you want to anger. So he shows up, and Draupadi's like, okay, what do we do? And she goes and she tells Yudhisthira. Yudhisthira's like, okay, don't worry, I'll stall them. Like, try to figure something out. And so Yudhisthira tells Durvasa Muni, why don't you guys go bathe? And when you come back, you can eat. So they all go down to the river. And then Yudhisthira comes back, and Krishna appears on the scene. Draupadi's like, hey, Krishna, hey, Govinda. Durvasa Muni, he just came with his 10,000 disciples, and he wants to eat, and I have nothing left. And Krishna says, oh, good, I'm hungry too. So you have to feed me. And Draupadi's like, Krishna, I don't have anything here. And so he says, you don't have anything to offer me. Draupadi looks in, sees a little piece of lettuce, gives it to Krishna. And when Krishna eats this, he becomes satisfied, and therefore Durvasa Muni and all of his disciples also become satisfied. So much so to the point that they're all extremely full, and they don't want to go back because they can't eat. So they don't want to embarrass themselves, so instead they just take off. So it's also a further lesson here that when we satisfy Krishna, also everybody else is satisfied. And then the Pandavas, we see they get to the point that they get out of the forest, and then the war happens. And the Pandavas have their crew, but the Kauravas, they have all of their supporters, plus they have Krishna's army. Because there's that whole pastime where Arjuna and Duryodhana, they go up to see Krishna. And Krishna's napping. And Arjuna and Duryodhana arrive. But Arjuna sits at Krishna's feet, and Duryodhana is at his head. So Krishna wakes up, and he sees Arjuna, and he sees Duryodhana. And he says, I know what you both want, so I'm going to offer one side can get my army, and one side can get me. But I will not fight. And since I saw Arjuna first, I'm going to let him choose first. So Arjuna says, okay, Krishna, I'll take you. And Duryodhana thinks Arjuna's crazy because Krishna has this whole entire army which he's used to defeat, various demons, Jarasandha, and all that. So Duryodhana's thinking, okay, I have one out. So we get on this huge battlefield, and the Pandavas are outnumbered. And they got Krishna, who won't fight. So on paper, things don't look very good for them. But we see that even throughout this battle, and even throughout every calamity, the Pandavas continually take shelter of Krishna, and Krishna continuously protects them. And even at one point on the battlefield, they're fighting, and Krishna stands up, and he absorbs this weapon into his chest. And Arjuna said, why did you do that? And Krishna said, oh, that guy, he had a boon that whoever he threw his weapon at would die immediately. So therefore, you didn't know that. So I stood up and I absorbed this weapon for you. So oftentimes, we don't even realize what Krishna is saving us from. You know, every day we go to work, we go to the office, we're doing these things. We don't see, these various things that Krishna is protecting us from. Krishna says in Gita, past, present, and future, I know everything. But, we just go on about our day. We don't realize this. So, but even though, we see that the Pandavas went through so much, and, they won this war. Even at the end, Kunti says, Krishna, I would go through all these calamities again and again, just to be with you. And we see that these calamities that the Pandavas went through, it didn't only work out good for them, but it worked out for the whole entire world too. Because even 5,000 years later, people are still hearing about the Pandavas. And what's happening? These pastimes are gradually awakening one's love for Krishna within their heart. So, everything that the Pandavas went through, it also, benefits us and it inspires us. And these are real things, Mahabharata, it means great history. It's one of the itihasyas. So these stories about the Pandavas and the Kauravas, this is not some mythology. These are real events that actually happened. So Krishna comes and he gives his pastimes to gradually attract us all back to him. But they also show us how to live, how to be a devotee in this world. Because life is very hard. And sometimes you think when you take the spiritual life that, okay, I'm not going to feel the pain of a particular situation. But the pain is still there. But what happens is that when one takes shelter of Krishna and that calamity, you gain a deeper realization in the end that makes everything that you went through so much more worth it. So I was thinking about my own life, not just to talk about what's going on in Shastra, but just to make this a little bit more relatable. Everything that led me up to taking shelter of Krishna, it was a series of calamities actually. And I remember my first calamity I went through, first really heavy calamity when I was about 13 or so. There was an issue with my parents and I had to go live with my grandparents. And I didn't want to go. I wanted to do things my way. I wanted to stay with my friends. I wanted to stay, with my school. I had my whole life planned out for me, and it didn't involve going to live with my grandparents. But if I hadn't gone to live with my grandparents in Florida, then I would have never gotten a scholarship to the University of Florida. If I never got a scholarship to the University of Florida, I would have never went there, and then I would have never met the devotees. And then and then once I met the devotees, I was serving there, and I was very happy there. And I thought, okay, I will just stay here for the rest of my life and, be happy. But then, by circumstance, then I come out to Tucson. And then I meet even better people. Of course, the devotees there are all very nice too. And then I gain deeper realizations. And I've met some, I've had some of my best relationships have come from my time in Tucson. You guys are really, my spiritual family. And it touches my heart so much that you would pitch in for me to come out here. Because, like I told some of the other devotees, there were some other people, down in Florida that wanted me to come see them. But you guys were the only ones that were like, okay, we're going to pay for you to come out here. So that got me, it's like, if I had never come out here, I would have never gotten, the awesome Krishna conscious family that I had now. And that was never on my radar. If somebody would have asked me, okay, you leave this temple and you go over there, I would have said no. No, I'm not leaving. But when one surrenders to Krishna and lets Krishna guide them, everything works out so much better than what we can actually plan. And then if I hadn't come here, situations wouldn't have happened where I ended up in the Dominican Republic. And then when I ended up in the Dominican Republic, for the first, 6 months, things were not easy. Actually quite hard. And, because I missed all of you guys. I didn't have the same services. I didn't understand the culture to the full extent. I was trying to communicate with people, but see, when I learned Spanish, I learned the letters S, D, and E, and in the Dominican Republic, they cut words like, so it's like learning a whole different language. So, ¿cómo estás? becomes, ¿cómo tú estás? And they talk like this. So it was like, I couldn't understand anybody when they spoke. And so I was feeling like, oh, completely alone. And then, you get up in the morning to take a bath, and sometimes there's no water, and you're doing something, and sometimes there's no electricity. And I thought, Krishna, like, what's going on? I had such nice service, I had such nice devotees. But I remember, I thought to myself, Lavanga, you remember when you came to Tucson during the pandemic and everything was on lockdown and it was a new place and you didn't know anybody that well? And I told myself, just give it 6 months and see what Krishna does. And you see what Krishna arranged? So I thought, okay, so just stay some time and see what Krishna arranges. And so I thought about that. And I thought, okay, let me stay here sometime. Let me see what Krishna works out. And gradually, over time, I started to understand things. Then I started to give class. Then I started to meet amazing people. And now it's like when the electricity goes off, I'm just like, okay, whatever. I got a flashlight. You you adjust the things. But so we go through these various calamities in life, and they're not easy. Especially when you go to a new place, it's quite an adjustment. And then sometimes you're planning things and your plans don't work out. I had various things that I was trying to do there that didn't work out. I had different disasters happen, but through all that, I realized Krishna's going to get me through this. And so something that can really help you when you're going through a difficulty, or when things aren't going the way you want them to go, or when you don't understand why things are happening the way they are. Because sometimes in spiritual life, we can be like, like Vyasadeva. Like, I'm doing everything, right? But there's something in me that, like, I'm dissatisfied. Like in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So these moments happen. Krishna consciousness is a very blissful process. But at the same time, we have to go through various things to develop love, to develop this pure love for Krishna. And so one thing, a practical tip that really can help you is that when things aren't working out well, or when, it's all hitting the fan, think about a time that you went through a horrible event and Krishna pulled you out of it, or that you were really happy that happened, because if that hadn't happened, it wouldn't have led you to this or led you to that. And that will increase your faith in Krishna consciousness. Because sometimes I see when people, we read this philosophy, but we also have to practice this philosophy. And to be Krishna conscious, first Prabhupada said, we have to be conscious. So I could read a whole bunch of slokas to you, but it won't really mean as much unless one actually takes the time to apply it in their life. So you actually have to try with these things. It's like with anything. With chanting japa, you have to try to avoid the 10 offenses. It's not like these things just happen automatically. But be a little bit thoughtful. Be a little bit introspective. Because, I think I've been gone, a little over a year. And even though, I missed you guys so much, I learned so much in that year that I'm so grateful, for everything here, for all the devotees here. And I'm really realizing that, there's such great opportunities here that, you don't have everywhere else, that I took for granted sometimes. Like, for example, if somebody came here that was new and asked for a Bhagavad Gita, who could give them one very quickly? Yeah. You don't always have that everywhere. Like I was giving a lecture to some engineering students there, and somebody said, "How can I get a copy of that book you're speaking out of?" And so there's not, not everywhere is there ample copies of like Prabhupada's books available, or all these different resources available. So I have such a greater appreciation for everything that's available here, and it's given me a lot of maturity, because I used to sometimes it would be breakfast and I would go and I would complain oh, I don't like the subject today, or whatever, or I don't like the doll today, but when Krishna puts you in a situation, where things, you have to work a little bit harder to be Krishna conscious, you develop this sense of gratitude. And this sense of gratitude is really what's needed for us to go back to Godhead. Because, if we're bitter, or if, we had this, we're making offenses to this devotee because they didn't make, the salad the way we wanted it or whatever, then, we're just going to have to stay here. But the devotee, one of the things about the devotees is that they're always grateful. They're always grateful to Krishna for everything they get. So it's very good to be introspective in this way. Write things down. Because then you really see how Krishna is working in your life and how he's gradually, reawakening your love for him. But what happens when we're not introspective in that way, we can often have this victim mentality. Okay, why me? Why is Krishna doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? I'm a good devotee. And we miss the lesson completely. And we miss the growth. And we miss, the beauty of the situation that we're also in. And so since Atul Govinda said, you can speak about, whatever inspires you, I tend to speak about my current realization unless somebody gives me a verse. So this has so far been my current realization, is that in every situation we have to take shelter of Krishna, and when we do, then it becomes like the end of Bhagavad Gita. Wherever there is Krishna, wherever there is Arjuna, there is opulence, victory, and morality. There's all of these things, and Krishna blesses you. Krishna helps you. When you take one step to serve him, he'll take 10, to help you out. There have been times where I was, praying, oh Krishna, please send some people, send some people to the temple. And then some people come to the temple. And I've met beautiful people down in Santo Domingo, and I've gotten to share Krishna consciousness with so many people. Plus, it's very beautiful there. So if you guys want to come and and come visit us, take some vacation, please come. We have very nice pineapples and plantains and mangoes and everything you could ever desire. One of the things is that they say everything grows out of the ground there. You don't have to. Here you have growing season, right? We have to plant at a certain time. We have to harvest at a certain time. But there, it's like always available. This is why it said, typically, Dominicans, they don't have to be on time for everything because, traditionally it was just everything was available, right? But here it was no, I have to plant this at this time, I have to harvest this at this time, I have to make sure a snake doesn't bite me, when I go out to the field, so it develops that mentality of, okay, that you have to be somewhere at a certain time. But there, everything is just more chill. So, and everybody is very, very happy and wonderful. It's a beautiful place. So, but yeah, I just wanted to leave you with that. And then also to remember that Krishna tells Arjuna that his devotee is never vanquished, in the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada said in a lecture on this verse, so therefore we should say, I'm going to become Krishna's devotee. So therefore one should desire to be Krishna's devotee. Because Krishna's devotee is never vanquished. Krishna's devotee never perishes. So with that, I don't know how much time we have.
We have about 20 minutes, but it's flexible.
20 minutes, flexible.
Yeah,
okay,
it's
flexible.
flexible.
Okay, so you guys.
A little flexible.
A little flexible. All right. Flexible's good. You guys have any questions or comments you like to ask me? Yes, Prabhu.
I come from almost the same place where you were.
Yeah.
And actually, I stay here. And I really appreciate what we have in America, but sometimes we're getting like a baby, The baby, he has his mother, his father, everything, but when the mother and his father is no longer there, it's hard for the baby. So the same thing I was thinking in America, we have everything, we're so opulent, everything, but in the time of hard time, we are in trouble, we lamenting. So the thing I was thinking, when you live to those places for so long, like Guadeloupe, you can handle the hardship, because now pretty soon, I don't know, I don't want to be scare everybody what's going on in the world now. We don't going to have too much opulence now, because America, go to a kind of, lot of problem. War thinking become very hard, and if we don't know how to live simple, like you say, we're going to be in big trouble. So we have to learn how to depend to nature and Krishna. This is very important. Thank you for reminding me about that, because when I came back to the state after staying in Guadeloupe, I really appreciate what I had. But in the same time, I said I got to be careful, don't get too much spoiled by what we are, because all these things will not be there forever. Can go anytime the sufferings, the war, so things going very hard. So we have to learn, like he explained, we have to learn how to depend to nature and live simple. Okay, in America, in France too, we're very spoiled. In Europe, very spoiled. Go to the island, go to Africa, go to India, you can do it. As our Shabbat say, it's good to go to visit those places in India. All the time, like we can learn as a devotee to live simple. It's good for devotee to visit all the time those places to understand. We should not depend, this is material thing. And we should be thankful at the same time. Thank you.
Yeah, very true. One thing is, I was thinking, I was like, what was my problem in the U.S.? Why didn't I do more books? Why didn't I do this? I just had like all these invitations at my disposal, all these books, like, why didn't I go out and like distribute more? Why didn't I do more? So, anyway, yes.
Thank you, Lavanga. That was really good talk. It's funny because I'm reading the Mahabharata now, and I was like, like when you were talking about it, it really got me excited. It's such a great history to know the background. But my question is, so as devotees, I think it's a lot easier for us to say we'll surrender to Krishna because we understand, we have this knowledge, and we have our Guru Maharaj who, really helps us move forward in that. But for me, for example, that I see a lot of people that are consistently suffering, it's a lot harder to explain, to say, just trust Krishna. Because we really can't necessarily say that.
Yeah.
So when they say, why am I going through this? Like, I always try to explain, like, see the bigger picture. There's always a silver lining, but it doesn't always land. So do you have any advice for me when people are suffering so much and we can't say, trust Krishna, or, have this, what would you say to that?
Absolutely. Because when I say trust Krishna, that doesn't mean that we don't actually take action to first you have to be a little bit introspective. Okay, why am I suffering? All right, so if it's some physical element, what's going on? What's paining me? Okay, is there some treatment for this? Something practical that I can do. It's not like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and trust Krishna. Somebody told me once, yes, we trust Krishna, but Krishna gives you intelligence and you also have to use it. So we endeavor, like something depends on us, but we pray like everything depends on Krishna. Does this make sense? So if somebody is if it's something physical, okay, so what's going on? Is there something we can do to treat that, help you, alleviate your suffering in some way? Okay. If it's mental, okay, what's causing this mental calamity? Maybe they need to talk to someone, maybe they need to, work that out, but while trusting Krishna at the same time. So people go through situations, and so you have to take some practical action towards that situation. Of course, I don't know the specific situation, so I'm being very broad, but and in the moments, maybe they don't know, okay, why I'm going through this. But also, it can be helpful, talk to them, depending on what they're going through. Be like, has there ever been a time that you were suffering really bad and you came out of it? What brought you out of it? What did you learn from that experience? And then that can also give people hope to know that, okay, I've been through something, really heavy before, and I came out on the other side.
So let me give you specific, because maybe you can help me with this. So I have a client who, her child, a 4-year-old, died.
Oh, yeah.
And it was very traumatic. She died in a flight from the islands, and they had to land in Santo Domingo actually, because she
Yeah.
died on the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
She stopped breathing and they couldn't resuscitate her. And, you know, seeing her and she called me when it happened. It was,
Right.
you know, because we were really close. But it's like, what do you say to that at that point where it's like a 4-year-old, you know, they're on vacation, they come back and she dies.
Yeah, okay, I like that you gave me a specific situation. Okay, so in that situation where one like loses a loved one, really in that particular moment, there are no words that's gonna take away that pain. And so I can just speak from personal experience. You know, when I was people in that situation, I'll sit with them and I'll say, look, you know, I can't imagine what you're going through. There are no words for this type of situation. You know, how can I support you? How can I be there for you? Because sometimes they need a moment. If it's really new, they need a moment to process it. So ask them first, you know, how can I be of support? How can I help you? Sometimes if they're, you know, very spiritual, maybe they'll want to pray. Maybe sometimes they'll want to talk about that loved one. You know, tell me about that person. So it helps to be present with people in times like that, and to be supportive in ways that they need. And then often I find after a moment, you know, if I'm dealing with devotees, depending on who I'm dealing with, but if it's devotees, sometimes I sit with them in that moment, and then later, you know, we're able to get more into like the Krishna conscious stuff once they process it. But yeah, that's the first step, you know, just ask. Just be there. Oftentimes when people lose a loved one, they just need someone to be there for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it might be that even just practical stuff like, you know, if they're really grieving, maybe they need someone to come do stuff like wash their dishes for them, do their laundry for them, because everything feels like too much in that moment. And I'm telling you stuff that I learned in grief counseling, creative care program, but because you mentioned that situation, so we got training in that particular situation. So, of course, this isn't so Shastra based, but in some ways it is, because it's being very personal. And that's what the devotee is that the devotees are very personal with others. And a lot of times that can really help someone bring them out of their situation. So, is that helpful? Yeah. Anything else?
It was just reminding me that, you know, Gurudev talks about devotee care. He says that should just be a way that we live. You know, it's not like a novel concept or something. It's just, you know, it's kind of like this new topic that we have this new idea about devotee care, which says, no, this should just be natural. It should be natural that we care for one another, you know.
Absolutely.
Even in material relationships that are close, it's just, you know, it's a natural way to deal with people. You know.
Even Sanatana Rupa Goswami, you know, they're great, you know, devotees in our movement, great acharyas, but even they would go and people would come and they would talk to them. You know, oh, I'm having this problem with my spouse, or they would tell them about their problems, and they would just sit with them and like listen and be there for them and give them advice. So, yeah, devotee care. It's you know, it's not just, oh, you know, the material world is Maya, or you know, your loved one is not their body, but it's being very personal with people, taking care of them, and devotee wants to help others make advancement in Krishna consciousness. That's why the whole Bhagavatam was spoken. The sages at Naimisharanya, they're asking Sutta Goswami, tell us the highest good for everyone. Because they're already self-realized, but they're worried about other people. So when the devotee is thinking, okay, how can I help others make advancement in Krishna consciousness? Sometimes to be there with them, to help them make advancement, you just need to be present. You need to be there. You need to listen, you know. And then by your caring attitude, then they can also start to take up the process, because they're like, hey, this person cares for me. You know, this is like a real spiritual person. And, you know, if they don't know anything about Krishna consciousness, they might ask you, how is it you are the way you are, you know? and then you can share like that. So, so yeah, and Prabhupada would also be like that too, if you would listen to his disciples. So, yeah, so being personal is very important. We have an impersonal problem sometimes in this movement. We are the impersonalists. The personalists are out there.
So the Shama Sundar was saying, oh, you were in prison. Krishna was also in prison.
Yeah.
you were dealing drugs. Oh, I also was, when I was, because he was doing pharmaceuticals, So I also was dealing drugs.
Actually, I'm sorry, you done?
Go ahead, bro.
We're talking about this subject about be personal, and you say that's the problem we have in the movement,
Mhm.
This is, I see that a lot actually, and I will not tell the name, but I see only most of this person, this devotee is always there when the devotee go to some hard time, death, sickness. This devotee is always there. And I saw, and I see other devotee, I cannot point my finger at the devotee, criticize devotee. I cannot put myself, other devotee are not really, really, close and really, really, how to explain that? Like you say, we are supporting. I don't see that too much in devotee. But I see that in one devotee here, I really appreciate that. And that is very important. I see now what I'm going through now, and I really appreciate devotee now, all of you. Now, I'm not embarrassed to say, in the beginning I was embarrassed to say, but I'm not embarrassed to say because I see Krishna do so much, miracle, I got this cancer, 4-stage cancer. My son was freaking out, Daddy, I received the PET scan, they said the cancer, it already get to your body. I was laughing, I said, ha ha, crazy. He said, Daddy, you always laugh, I said, I don't care, because I don't have no suffers, nothing. Because I see that because of devotees who are very concerned. So many devotees are very concerned. They call me all the time, go as soon as, because they know me for 40 years. They send things for me, so many things, and I really appreciate that. And I see how devotees are very important. And we have to be the more and more concerned about each other. We should not be there for devotee. Oh, you do a good kirtan, Prabhu, how do you go? I do good service, but when it's time the devotee is sick, he needs some help, we turn our back, it's no good. So I see so many of you supporting me, and that makes me feel good. It's not only the support, but the love. The love is a greatest medicine. I feel so much love around the devotee, and I start feeling better. I start feeling better. I have a brother who passed away. I'm sorry to take over. I have a brother who passed away recently, and I say the reason he passed away because his own kids, his family, was not really there for him. So that can cause us to die if we don't feel support, love, because we call this person, we go to see this person. Person can live longer than that. My brother passed away from the stroke. He could live longer because the reason I say that, I have another brother, when the same situation, his brother passed away, his son is very concerned about him and he's still living. So, like you say, the concern we have about each other can help the person live longer and stronger. And I feel that on the road. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
See, the love of the devotees health. Alright. The society, Kalakanta Prabhu, he always told us that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And you have to have a society of love and trust amongst the devotees. It's really key, and that's the element in which people can go deeper into their Krishna consciousness. Because in spiritual life we have to fly our own plane, but we have to have gasoline for that plane. And the loving relationships with the devotees, it's that gasoline. But if there's division If, you know, of course there's going to be conflicts, but if there's these conflicts that we don't actively work to resolve, then, you know, what's the point of preaching? Because nobody's going to want to come and join a society, you know, where things are worse than what they're experiencing outside. So we have to, you know, we need each other. So we have to work very hard to create that loving atmosphere. And, you know, because we're all one big family, sometimes family members fight, but like family members, we have to be able to resolve these things and let it go. And in that atmosphere where things are built on that love and trust with devotees, people tend to be the happiest. You don't need a huge community, you know, but even if you have like that small community where that's there, everybody is thriving. So, anyway. Haribo! ¿Dónde estaba?
Trabajando.
Lavanga, Devi, Dasi, Ki. We got you.
Do you have anything else, or was that the end?
Yeah, that was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope that was okay. That's more of a devotee crowd. So.
It was wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Dorsona, you want to lead the
I
kirtan?
only do the.
He'll lead the kirtan, and you'll do the Nrsimha Day. Oh, okay, perfect.